Hi, my name is Gwen. Today I'm going to be reading Not on My Patch, A Young Wizard's Halloween by Diane Duane. Now for the time fix, this work falls between Young Wizards Book 9, A Wizard of Mars, and Book 10, Games Wizards Play. Its events precede those of the Young Wizards novelette, How Lovely Are Thy Branches, and the interstitial novel, Young Wizards Lifeboats, and occur on or around October 31st, 2010. Now just a heads up, I'm not a professional reader. This is not something I do regularly. So I will do my absolute best to get these things right and correct, but no promises. So that's it. Let's hit chapter 1. Nita Callahan was standing by the dining room table, scowling at it and having second thoughts about the items laid out ready on it for her, especially the big sharp knife. I don't know, she thought. I really don't know if I want to do this, but now that it's here, I guess I have to. I guess. She picked up the knife, toyed with it for a moment, warily tested its edge with her thumb, then looked at it for about the 20th time at the thing that she was preparing to stab. The doorbell rang. Pfft, she said, rolling her eyes, for this had been happening all afternoon. Every time she worked her courage up to do the deed, she got interrupted. Except maybe I think I want to be interrupted where this is involved. You want to get that one, honey? Her dad said from somewhere toward the back of the house. Yeah, no problem. Nita headed for the front door, picked up a couple of trick-or-treat bags from the little table her dad had put by the doorway, and opened the door. There was a tallish young guy standing there in a long, plum-colored 18th century frock coat that had lace spilling out of the sleeves and collar. He was also wearing a tricorn hat jammed down onto a long dreadlocked wig, tight breeches, and thigh boots. And he was carrying a silver plastic cutlass, which he waved at her jauntily. Arr, he said. Nita looked the kid up and down, and finally had to laugh. The mustache, she said. It's crooked. Kit's eyes widened, and he reached up to push the stuck-on mustache back into place. This thing's stability, he said, leaves a lot to be desired. So do a spell and stick it on that way. Kit laughed. Waste a wizardry on this? Pass, he said, as he headed past Nita into the living room. I've got spirit gum. Somewhere here. He stuffed the plastic cutlass through his belt and started going through the frock coat's pockets. Nita's big, silver-haired dad came out of his bedroom at the back, just finishing the act of pulling on a sweatshirt decorated with flapping bats. As his head popped out of the neck of it, he ruffled his hair back into place and looked Kit up and down. Cristoforo Rodriguez, the Scourge of Tortuga, huh? Hey, Mr. C. Yeah, more or less. Looks good, Nita's dad said. So, how soon can we have this stuff off the table, honey? There are some other things I need to be doing while I get ready for the slavering hordes. I think I said that word right. Nita sighed. I'm working on it, she said, and followed him into the dining room. That is one beat-up pumpkin, Kit said, looking at what sat on the table where the newspapers were the thickest. Yeah, Nita's dad said as he went into the kitchen. I went over to that pick-your-own place between here and Uniondale. You know the one. Shouldn't have left it so late, I guess. They'd been cleaned out of all the biggest ones. All the pumpkins that were left were either on the small side or lopsided or dented one way or another. Still, he said, giving it a glance from the kitchen door, this one has character. Nita was inclined to agree with him. The pumpkin was about 1.5 feet across and had probably been growing somewhere exposed, to judge by the dried-out veining all over the top of it. She ran a hand over the top of it, as she'd already done a bunch of times this afternoon, feeling the crinkly texture and reflecting that it was definitely more interesting than the smooth, picture-perfect pumpkins she'd seen a few days ago at the grocery store, but had gotten distracted and forgotten to pick up. More avoidance, she thought. She sighed. I guess I should get on with this, she said, and picked up the knife. The doorbell rang. Ugh! Nita said. This is never going to get done, and everybody's showing up so early. I thought we were finishing with the littlest kids now. She went off to the living room, picked up the same pair of candy bags she'd picked up before, and opened the door. Nita found herself staring at a tall, gangly, black-haired guy wearing a shaggy alley-oop-style caveman skin over a green and white striped soccer jersey that said Sports World in big letters, and in smaller ones around a little badge on the breast, Bray Wanderers FC. The guy had more splotchy, piebald skins bound around his legs and over his Doc Martens. And he was balancing a truly huge caveman club over one shoulder. "Hey, be happy," he said. "It's Samhain." She laughed at the sight of him. Ronan had purposely grimed himself up and punked his hair out in weird Celto-goth points with some kind of hair wax that appeared to have the holding power of dried concrete. And he was carrying a rough burlap sack with very dysfunctional one-eyed jack-o'-lantern skeleton painted on it. "Come on in," Nita said. "But why so formal? Thought you were going to just appear out of nothing in the backyard like normal people." "Because I prefer to yank your chain," Ronan said as he came in, as is traditional. "And speaking of which, get a load of you! That's a new look." Nita grinned, though she found herself blushing at the same time. "Not so new," she said, brushing at the skirt, if that was the word for it, of her costume. "It was big on Mars once upon a time. If big is the right word to describe something there's so little of. In its Martian incarnation of the costume, heavy on gems and gleaming metal and filmy, translucent drapery, could still have been described as fairly minimal, and more so, depending on which Mars you were talking about. The wizardry jury was still out on how Edgar Rice Burroughs had come so close to describing what the first race of Mars considered decent daywear. Nita had been less concerned about that issue than how to adjust the design so that she wouldn't get arrested for indecent exposure or scandalize her dad. She'd opaqued the long, sheer skirt down and added an underskirt, as well as short, filmy sleeves and a fair amount of coverage to the bodice. And then had sent the whole design off to one of the retailers at the crossings who owed both her and Carmela some large favors. The overall result was satisfying, even though she was still wanting to go get a jacket if the temperature dropped too low. "I got kind of used to it while I was working up there," Nita said. She didn't mention what she thought Ronan might be perfectly able to guess, that Kit had liked it on her and had been too shy to say as much. "So if anybody asks, I'm an alien princess or something." "But as I understand it, you kind of were," Ronan said and smiled. It was less jokey or edgy smile than she usually saw from him, and Nita blushed again. "What's the matter with me? Stop it, she thought. But as usual, the blush was ignoring her and would plainly be taking its own sweet time about burning out. Nothing to do but carry on. "It got better," Nita said and grinned at him. "Anyway, why are we standing here? Come on in." He followed her into the living room where Kit had come out to see who was there. "Hey, look, it's the dread pirate Rodriguez," he said as the two of them clasped hands over arm. Then Ronan started snickering. "Jeez Louise, Kit! Worst mustache ever! Why didn't you just give it up and grow one?" "Don't think he hasn't been trying," said a voice from the bathroom at the back of the house. Kit turned a weary glance on Nita. "Is it all right if I destroy your sister a little?" "Knock yourself out," Nita said, but even the lone ones had a run at it and didn't get very far. Kit sighed and leaned over the living room candy table, picking up one of the newly filled orange and black paper trick-or-treat packages and peering into it. "The problem is that if you use wizardry to get your beard growing, you're stuck with it. And you don't want to start shaving yet. Fair play to you there," Ronan said, rubbing his own face, which was adorned under the makeup grime with what appeared to be about 3 days' worth of stubble. "Believe me, I don't mind having a little holiday from the face scraping every now and then." "How did you get here, though?" Nita asked, taking the bag away from Kit and putting it back on the candy table. "I thought you still got trouble with doing single teleports out of Ireland because of all the old spell residue built up in the ground. Did you hitch over with somebody who had an authorized transit?" "Nope, no problems at all with single transits today," Ronan said. "Because in the enlightened land in which I dwell, Halloween is an official government holiday. And this being the case, the local senior wizards always open some safe transport spots so people celebrating the day that's in it can spell jump in and out." I'm going to try that sentence again. Oh my gosh. "Because in the enlightened land in which I dwell, Halloween is an official government holiday. And this being the case, the local senior wizards always open some safe transport spots so people celebrating the day that's in it can spell jump in and out of the place without too much trouble." He glanced around. "But speaking of my usual ride, where's wee Daryl? Thought he'd be here." "He had a change of plans," Kit said. "Decided to stay over in Baldwin this year. It's not really that long since he finished up his ordeal, and his folks are still a little freaked out by all of it. He doesn't want to push them too hard on letting him be out by himself issue, so he's letting them ride herd on him for Halloween this time. Pity, Ronan said. And he didn't want to do one of those be two places at once tricks? Kit shook his head. Tom and Carl told him to cut back on the co-location stuff for a while till his power levels settle down. I think they're afraid he'll strain himself. Or find out something about himself he shouldn't know, Ronan said. Oh well, too bad. Always like having his smiling face around. So what's on the agenda? He looked over the table and picked up the trick-or-treat bag Kit had just put down. We doing the same drill he coached me on? Go door to door, say the magic words, get people to give us sweets for nothing? That's it, Nita said, deftly reaching across as he was starting to open the bag, taking it from him and putting it back on the table. And then over to Tom and Carl's to see what their haunted house looks like. It's their turn to do one for the town this year. We're just finishing up some last details here. Meaning stuff that should have been done 2 or 3 nights ago, Kit said. Nita sighed. Kit had been teasing her about this for a couple days. Come on, it's in the dining room, Nita said and led the way through. The dining room table was covered with newspapers, and the newspapers were covered with the remains of prep for the night's trick-or-treaters. There were about 60 or 70 more of the little paper bags decorated in orange and black, all now stuffed with candy and twisted closed. There, still untouched, was the pumpkin. Ronan looked it over. Not as big as some of the ones I've seen here, he said, sitting down at the table and picking up one of the bags. Some of your neighbors have ones the size of beach balls. Nita considered taking this bag, too, away from Ronan, and then shrugged. Yeah, well, she said, and leaned against the table, gazing at the pumpkin. We're kind of working our way back in gradually. Back in? Ronan said, opening the bag and peering into it curiously. Yeah, the way school around here used to be, when you were 12 or so, everybody started thinking that they were too old to be trick-or-treating anymore, so I stopped. And then the year after that, Kit and I had an ordeal, and I got kind of distracted. Halloween didn't seem like much of a big deal all of a sudden, except for Doreen, the family kind of went off it for a while. And then, after Mom, Nita sighed and shrugged. That year, no one felt much like it anyway, but this year Dad was saying, why don't we revive the tradition? Mom always liked it. And it seemed like a good idea. Doreen even got into it. Goodness, Ronan said. Will she be honoring us with her presence eventually, do you think? Don't get snotty, Nolan, said a voice from the back bathroom. Unlike some people who just throw themselves together with hair product and any old spare cowhide they have lying around, I like to make sure I look good before I go out. Nita snickered very softly, but then turned her attention back to the pumpkin. Better get on with this, she thought. She picked up the knife, then hesitated yet again. What's with you? Ronan asked as he emptied the trick-or-treat bag onto the table and began going through the contents. You look like the reluctant axe-murderer. Nita groaned under her breath and sat down in the chair at the end of the table. I just don't know if this is strictly ethical. Kit pulled out a chair too and fiddled with his frock coat for a moment so that he could avoid sitting on it and messing it up. You know, he said, you could always just ask the pumpkin how it feels. She had, in fact, been avoiding this, nervousness about what the answer was going to be. But there's no avoiding it, I guess. Pretty soon we're going to have to get moving. Nita put out a hand and ran it once more over the scratchy, veiny skin around the pumpkin stem. Excuse me, she said in the speech, but exactly how are you about this? There was a brief pause while the pumpkin got its vegetable consciousness wrapped around the idea that someone was speaking to it, let alone someone who would understand the response. This what? The pumpkin asked. Nita hesitated. I'm about to stick a knife in you, Nita said after a moment. Cut off your top and scoop out your insides with a spoon. There was another pause. Your point being? Said the pumpkin. Nita blinked, as she was generally used to more energetic responses from plant life. But then those are mostly still growing in the ground. Well, isn't there some chance this might hurt you? Haven't felt a thing since I got pulled off the vine, said the pumpkin. Just been taking it easy since then. It paused for a bit longer this time. Besides, it said after a few moments more, it's autumn, isn't it? I'm supposed to die now. It's all about the seeds, after all. I rot. but the seeds don't. Some of them will wake up. Then I'll wake up in one of them, or maybe more. So you really don't mind if I cut off your top, pull your insides out, and carve a face in you? Nita said, still slightly incredulous. Well, what's it for? Celebrating the time of year, Nita said. The autumn, the year's end, and a new beginning, I guess. Ronan nodded. That's what it meant when we invented it, he said. If a pumpkin could have shrugged, this one would have. Then do it. I don't mind being part of a celebration, and maybe it'll be fun to have a face. The permission could hardly have been more clear-cut. Nita got up, picked up the knife again, and said, Okay, here we go. She braced herself and made the first cut, half expecting to hear a scream, but there wasn't any response at all. Are you okay? She said. Sure. When are you going to start? Considering she was standing there with the cut-off top of the pumpkin in her hand, this was reassuring. Okay, Nita said, and got to work in earnest, scooping out the seeds and the webby bits in the middle. Within a few minutes, she had all the pulp out and had begun cutting the face. Kit and Ronan immediately started offering helpful design tips and critiquing her cutting technique, so that Nita lost any further concern about the pumpkin's feelings in a vague fog of annoyance at the kibitzing. And how many of these have you done, oh great design expert? Nita said to Ronan when she couldn't bear it anymore. Pumpkins? Not a single one, I'm glad to say. Kit glanced at him, confused. Wait, I thought you guys invented Halloween. Of course we did. The pumpkins to carve and the candy, though, that's new. We didn't get candy when I was little, just nuts and apples. Nita and Kit looked at him, incredulous. And that was all? Kit said. That wouldn't get your house a lot of business in this neck of the woods. Might even get you egged. Different times, Ronan said. Different traditions. Back then, people just gave the kids what we grew at home. Stuff from outside was too expensive. But nowadays, you lot have ruined us. We're coming down with pumpkins, and plastic jack-o'-lanterns, and crappy superhero costumes. Then he snickered a little. You know what we used before pumpkins? What? Turnips. Ronan started laughing. Turnips? Nita said in wonder. But wasn't the whole carving thing originally about putting something freaky enough out in front of your house that it would scare the demons away? Ronan was still laughing, but he managed to stop himself after a few moments, wiping his eyes. Yeah, and you do have to ask yourself what poor weedy whip of a demon would be scared of a carved-up turnip. Not that I'm sure why demons would be scared of pumpkins either, Kit said. Ronan shook his head, but he grinned a little. Some traditions don't make sense, he said. No point in paying attention to them if they don't work for you. Like the apples and nuts. Lots of lovely fiber, no question. Good for little growing kids, but I think I prefer these wheat marshmallowy things. He reached into yet another bag he'd been plundering and plucked at it a screamingly yellow cellophane-wrapped chick eyeing its packaging. Peeps? Poops? Poops? I'm a child. Kit snorted with laughter and mimed falling over sideways out of his chair. Must be some planet where they poop this color, Ronan said, examining the marshmallow chick with a critical eye. Would you ever look at the shade? Think of the god-awful crap they must put in these things to make that happen. He popped the chick into his mouth and chewed with a meditative expression. Revolting, Ronan said after a moment. Got any more? They come in orange, too, Kit said, digging around in yet another of the bags and coming up with an orange marshmallow pumpkin, which he unwrapped and tossed to Ronan. Who's Ronan? Will you two cut that out? Nita said as she finished with the pumpkin's second eye. It took me hours to get those right. Ronan ingested the peat pumpkin and started going through the contents of another of the dumped-out bags. And look at these, he said, picking out a piece of candy corn that had somehow wiggled its way into the marshmallow pumpkin packet. Look at this thing. It's just so much sugar and dye. All the chemicals in these, you'll stunt your growth for sure. Here, I'll eat them for you. Nita sighed in resignation. These peanut things are good, she said, picking up one candy that Kit had spilled out of another of the bags. Is she talking about circus peanuts? Ew. Ronan stared at the pale orange object. That's never a peanut. Who are you kidding? Oh. Okay, let me back up. Nita sighed in resignation. Sorry, I got stuck on the whole poops thing. That really got me. Nita sighed in resignation. These peanut things are good, she said, picking up one candy that Kit had spilled out of another of the bags. Ronan stared at the pale orange object. That's never a peanut. It's just supposed to sort of look like one. It's marshmallow, too. Who are you kidding? Ronan said. This thing's hard. A styrofoam peanut that might be. Different kind of marshmallow. Ronan bit into it anyway, then gave Nita the kind of look reserved for someone unfortunate whose senses were malfunctioning. And why does it taste of bananas? You people are unwell. Nonetheless, he started rooting around in the candy on top of the table for another. In the back of the house, the bathroom door opened. A few seconds later, Doreen came into the dining room, and Ronan and Kit turned to look at her. Whoa, Kit said, and Ronan simply burst out laughing. For Doreen was turned out in a long brown overrobe and cross-wrapped beige gi-like tunic of a young Jedi. Every detail had been handled. The breeches, the boots, even the narrow apprentice braid hanging down one side, with her red hair otherwise tied into a short ponytail behind. Behind her came Spot, who for the occasion had applied a virtual shape-shade field to himself and now looked like the kind of little low-running droid you see that when it sees you coming, Behind her came Spot, who for the occasion had applied a virtual shape-change field to himself and now looked like the kind of little low-running droid that when it sees you coming, hurriedly does a K-turn and runs away squeaking in fear. Nita knew Doreen had been working on getting her costume right for days, and therefore she wasn't above teasing her a little. Still looks like a bathrobe, she said. Doreen turned a faintly scornful look on Nita. People who carry these are not wearing bathrobes, she said, twitching aside the overrobe to reveal hanging from the bathrobe's inner belt a foot-long cylindrical object. This she unhitched, flipped in the air, and caught while hitting its actuator stud. The lightsaber's actinic blade instantly sprang out and sang softly in the air. Ronan nodded, impressed. Now that's a nice wizardry, Kit said. Doreen gave Kit the same look. You kidding? Who needs wizardry for this? I bought one from one of Carmella's weapons suppliers. Light-based weapons are real popular with species that have tight-channel plasma technologies. Once you've got one, modding the hilt onto this thing's no big deal. She flicked her wrist from side to side, and the blade sizzled and hummed in the air. She looked at it with an expression of satisfaction tinged with annoyance. Though you won't believe the crap I went through to make it make that noise. Any decent light sword's completely silent. What kind of idiot builds weapons like bad guys hear you coming? Nita sucked in a breath and was glad there were none of the more rabid Star Wars fans around to take issue with such heresy. Okay, she said, just don't let anybody else play with that thing. Are you insane? Doreen said, collapsing the blade and hanging the lightsaber hilt in her belt again. It's DNA locked. All the basic models come with that now. She glanced at the table and the neat rows of candy bags. Now, not quite so neat. This is getting kind of messed up. Yes, it is, Nita said, glaring at Ronan and Kit. You guys are going to get plenty of stuff once we're out. Will you lay off this? Kit and Ronan both smiled at her angelically, but they showed no signs of stopping. Gotta get them out of here before they eat it all, Nita thought. Okay, she said, we're done here. She wrapped the seeds and pulp from the pumpkin in the top few layers of newspaper on which she'd been working, took them into the kitchen, and put them in a bag with the composting waste. So where are you going to put it? Kit said. Front step? Probably, Nita said. But as she came back into the dining room, looked at the pumpkin, realized it was looking back at her. Despite the carven smile, it looked a little sad. No, she said, I'm taking him with. Dad can't keep an eye on the front door every minute, and I don't want him getting smashed while we're out. Kit looked at her quizzically. You're going to carry a real pumpkin around with us. Nita studied the pumpkin briefly. It's not like he's overripe, she said, or too heavy. I can get some rope, pierce through the sides, and make a handle. I'll take a separate bag for the candy. He? Doreen said, bemused. Ronan shook his head in genial disbelief. I've seen a lot of wizards do weird things, he said, but I've never seen one bond with a vegetable before. Life's full of these little surprises, Nita said. She fitted the pumpkin's top back in place, saw to her satisfaction that it fit snugly. Then, on an afterthought, she removed it again, shook her charm bracelet around on her wrist, and pinched one charm, a tiny light bulb that had a ready-to-activate spell attached to it. When she pulled her finger and thumb away from the charm again, they had a little spark of bright white light between them. Nita reached inside the pumpkin and snugged the little particle of wizard light down into place where she'd most deeply dug away the pumpkin's flesh at the bottom, then put the stem lid back on. The wizard light shone very satisfactorily through the pumpkin's new eyes and mouth, even in daylight. "Anybody sees that," Nita said, "they'll think it's an LED. Give me a couple minutes to deal with the handle and we can go." It took less than that, as it turned out. Some of the heavy braided raffia twine that her dad used in the florist business proved to be perfect for the job. When it was done, Nita tested the handle, found it entirely secure, and then equipped herself with one of several Halloween-themed paper shopping bags. She handed one of each to the others. "You ready?" "All set," Ronan said. "Daddy, I think we're going," Nita said. "So I see," he said, looking in again from the kitchen. "And you've got your phones with you if there are any problems." "Don't think there's likely to be much in the way of problems," Nita said. Her dad watched them head out the front door with a slightly thoughtful expression. Nita blushed one more time, for though her dad knew there'd recently been some kind of status change in her relationship with Kit, she hadn't yet been successful in explaining it to him, because she hadn't yet finished figuring it out herself. "Don't be too late," her dad said. Nita knew this was code for, "Don't do anything I wouldn't want you to do." "I won't," she said, and very much hoped, as the door shut behind them, that this was going to turn out to be true. All right, so that's chapter 1.